Hi, I'm Dan Costa, Editor-in-Chief of PCMag.com, and welcome to Fast Forward. We are at Mobile World Congress on the trade show floor at the Ookla booth, and we're talking to some of the leaders and pioneers in the digital revolution, specifically the mobile revolution. And I have one of those leaders with me today. It is Jessica Rosenworcel. Rosenworcel is an FCC commissioner for the United States. We're going to talk about 5G rollouts, we're going to talk about broadband competition, and we're going to talk about the unfortunate state of net neutrality. Jessica, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
So you are a long way from home, but this is not your first Mobile World Congress. You're a Mobile World Congress veteran.
I am. There's a lot to learn about the state of mobile in the world, not just in the United States, but worldwide. I mean, there's 5 billion mobile subscribers. It's important, I think, for US regulators to understand what are they doing? How are they using devices? How are we using connectivity? We need to think beyond our borders because I think a lot of innovative ideas will come from places outside the United States, and we're going to have to incorporate them into our wireless ecosystem.
So we've talked a little bit about before we started recording about sort of the international and global nature of Mobile World Congress. What are some of those perspectives, some of those learnings? What's the rest of the world doing differently than what we're doing?
Well, it's interesting to see different spectrum bands that are being used around the world and prioritized for 5G service. Some of them we're exploring in the United States, and some we're not. In some ways we're ahead, and in other ways we're behind. And it's really a quick way to educate yourself about what's happening in the world with wireless spectrum policy. So that's one of the reasons I feel so privileged to be here.
One of the things that we're all hoping that 5G would bring would be like a sort of global approach to spectrum management and to the technology services associated with it. Do you think that's going to happen? Is there going to be one 5G that can work anywhere on the planet?
Well, I'm an optimist that the world recognizes the powers of economies of scale, and that over time we will have more use of common spectrum and air interfaces, and we will wind up having greater possibilities for everyone at lower cost. So on that point, I'm definitely an optimist.
And in terms of the timing of the rollout, because you've been coming to MWC for a while, I have as well. You know, 5G has been a topic of conversation for years.
No, it's been like this buzzword. Everyone mentions it.
And no one knew what it was.
And you sound cool. Maybe it's a marketing term. But you know, we did have some standards rolled out from 3GPP last year, and we are now seeing early stage deployment. And I think we are going to see real 5G activity around 2020, and I'm looking forward to it.
And in terms of the United States and the rest of the world, do you think the United States, where do we fit in the competitive mix?
That's a good question.
You know, we've got a handful of carriers that are doing a lot of work in trying to lay this groundwork, but I mean, you know, how are we positioned?
Yeah. Well, I think it's good to take a historical perspective. And in the current generation of wireless service, 4G, LTE, the US, we've been in the leadership role. I mean, we have only 5% of the world's population, but about 3 times as much of that, percentage-wise, worldwide, for 4G deployment. So we were out there early, and I think we reaped the benefits. I mean, operating systems are run in the US. So much mobile commerce comes out of the United States. Now the question is, in the next generation, in 5G, can we do the same thing? Because it's true, you know, laurels are not good resting places. I am honestly a little bit worried. I think that our success in 4G doesn't immediately translate to leading the world in 5G. And I'll give you an example of why I'm worried. We do not, at the FCC, have a spectrum auction currently scheduled for this year. And I think it's a stunning fact that we've got other countries like Germany, the United Kingdom, Romania, and South Korea that have already planned auctions for this year. And I don't want to see the FCC or the United States fall behind. So I'm pressing my colleagues right now to make sure that we put the next wireless spectrum auction on the calendar.
And auctions are one of the things that drove our 4G lead.
You bet.
It was assigning the spectrum.
You put the airwaves out there, and then you see what innovative companies can do. And with 4G LTE, we really changed the world by putting computers in everyone's pocket and purse and palm with the smartphone. And I'm excited to see what 5G will do, but it's going to take us pushing out some more spectrum to make that happen.
One of the statistics that came out just last week was that for the first time ever, smartphone sales had actually declined in the fourth quarter of last year. A lot of people are saying maybe we've reached, or some people are saying maybe we've reached peak smartphone. Certainly nobody at this show believes that, but you know, what's your take on smartphone penetration? Is the hardware going to start to evolve into other types of devices?
I think it will. I don't think it is evolving at the same pace it used to. And I think when you move from 4G to 5G, you actually need a different framework. 4G was all about putting that smartphone in your, like I was saying, your palm, pocket, or purse, and giving you incredible computing power. I think 5G is different. It's more diffuse. It's about connecting so much that's in our landscape and benefiting from the efficiencies of understanding that landscape better and using scarce resources more prudently. That's a very different model from what we've historically had. And I also think it'll put a new premium on video. We'll have capacity to watch 4K video at speeds that we don't know today. And so communicating itself, I think, will move from text-based forms to video over time. So those are changes that are bigger than what we understand with smartphones today. And they're still on the horizon, but I think they're coming.
I think there's also a transition from, LTE is very good at delivering voice, delivering data, delivering text messages. But as we move to 5G, it's a whole new realm of applications that get opened up.
It's a whole new paradigm, and I don't think we fully understand it yet. I think we'll have a new premium on video and also connecting more things in our lives in ways that provide us with more opportunities to exploit efficiencies so that we, go about our day-to-day business a little bit differently. It's my hope that we're going to use these things to take on really messy, regular life challenges. I mean, why shouldn't we have sensors in all of our streetlights and roadways and then have them in our cars? And what if we could cut commute times for everyone in some town by 15 to 20 minutes? I think 5G technology could make that happen, and I think that would be a terrific thing. And there's things we can do with healthcare, with diabetes, with monitoring, that could wind up making whole sets of our population more healthy and more likely to get the healthcare they need. All of these things are possible, and they're different than a traditional smartphone or an app associated with one.
It also seems that there's a lot of those applications that are sort of right on the border between the public interest and the private interest.
Absolutely.
And that, there may not be a private incentive to cut people's commuting time, but there's certainly, it's of interest to city government, to municipal government.
You're right. I think we're going to have to start quantifying, though, why that stuff is economically smart. There's a lot of studies about parking, for instance, and how much time in a municipal area is spent looking for a parking spot. If we can come up with systems that actually indicate to every driver where parking is available, we could reduce traffic. And if we reduce traffic, would we create more opportunities for people to stroll and do business and engage with one another in municipal areas? I think all those things are possible, but we're going to have to rethink the world as we know it. Yeah,
and it's interesting too, the parking problem. You've talked about, there's cities that are experimenting with this technology. Mm-hmm. And just by taking cars off the road so they don't have to spend 20 minutes looking for a parking spot, they can do it in 5, that takes a lot of cars off the road and it really does reduce congestion. Yeah, and does it change the economic vitality of a city? Does it make people more likely to spend time in retail locations or to do business with one another face to face? I think that there are cultural changes that follow, and I'm excited to see what they are. All right. So now we have to go to a darker subject, which is net neutrality, which we've written a lot about on PCMag. I know you've spoken a lot about barring an act of Congress. And I've been waiting to use that phrase for a long time. But barring an act of Congress. I'm not sure a lot of people are waiting to use that phrase. But I don't think there's going to be one. But okay. Barring an act of Congress, net neutrality protections are going to go away. They're going to in April of this year. And I know you've been very active on this subject. But what is going to happen in April when this happens? What should consumers look for in terms of the expiration of these rights? Well, to be clear, I support net neutrality, and I opposed the effort of my colleagues to roll back the FCC's network neutrality protections last year. I thought it was a misguided decision then. I still do. In the end, we handed our broadband providers the right and power to block content, to throttle services, and to censor things you see online. I don't think that's smart or prudent. I also don't think it's consistent with our history of communications in this country, which has given anyone and everyone a fair shot. Now, the FCC made this blunder, made this error, and in its wake, something amazing happened, which is that we woke up this sleeping giant, the American public. They're angry. I mean, I can tell you, people have written my office more on this issue than anything else that I've ever worked on at the agency, by a factor of somewhere like 100. I mean, letters coming in and emails and phone calls, all of it.
And we're seeing a lot of activity out there too in legislative chambers. We've got state legislatures and everywhere from Massachusetts to Nebraska looking at net neutrality laws. We have the governors in several states, including Montana, Hawaii, New York, Vermont, and New Jersey, issuing executive orders suggesting they won't do business with companies in those states that don't abide by net neutrality. And we've got efforts in Congress right now through a vehicle known as the Congressional Review Act to try to overturn the FCC and its handiwork. And so while that decision was really ugly, unfortunate, and wrong, and I think history won't be kind to it, what's amazing is we've seen all of this activism in such a short time. And that makes me feel like there's some hope and there's some possibility here. So
it was, I mean, it really is, it had overwhelming public support.
Yes.
When you would poll on it, when you explain the issue, which is a relatively complex one, when you explain the issue to voters, they all supported net neutrality. But the administration was clear, and certainly Ajit Pai was clear that he was not going to be a fan.
Right.
And so he's delivering on his promises. I have heard the argument that the broadband industry is so afraid of irritating consumers and creating a backlash that they won't act on these new powers, and they won't take advantage of their newfound freedoms. Is that something that you think we should trust in?
Well, it's hard to know. Certainly in the short term, I think they'll be careful. I think that's prudent. What I worry about over the long term, though, are not the biggest companies whose names we all know today. It's the smaller startups who may not be able to happen because they won't be able to pay that necessary fee to reach you and I as customers. And that's where my greatest worry lies. It's really in the future.
Yeah, I mean, Netflix has basically withdrawn from the fight because they're big enough now that all these carriers need to support Netflix. And Netflix has said, we already have deals with all these companies. We have co-location services. We're going to be fine. It's the next Netflix, the Netflix that the company that just creates a new service that may compete with a Verizon or a Comcast, but doesn't get the chance to flourish because they won't have access to that same network.
Yeah, I mean, we want all this new cool stuff to grow in our economy. I mean, it's amazing that if you have a good idea now and a product or service that has potential, you can almost instantaneously have global reach. And it's hard to get heard out there between all the noise, but there's that possibility, and that possibility is dependent on internet openness. We're going to have to find a way for that to continue, despite what the FCC just did.
So, do you think? What do you think about the act in Congress? What are its chances? Because it is an extraordinarily popular move. I've got to think that there's some, and it's also largely a bipartisan issue. There are a lot of Republicans that support net neutrality. It's more complicated than a traditional ideology.
The polling that I saw from the University of Maryland, very close to the FCC's vote, suggested that 83% of the public supported the FCC's rules, and that breakdown, when they did it, they found that it didn't matter what your politics were, really. Widespread support. In Congress right now, I know that there are 50 senators that support the Congressional Review Act. It takes a long time to usually line up 50 senators for anything, and this was awfully quick. I know that there are more than 140 House members who have supported a similar resolution. And so we'll see. I don't have a crystal ball, but I know that a lot of the country and a lot of internet users are watching.
Let's talk about another somewhat related issue, which is the state of broadband competition in the United States. In some ways, the United States is very well off. We've got great broadband connectivity in our urban centers, but in a lot of areas, and even in a lot of cities, there aren't a lot of providers. Consumers get one, maybe two broadband providers choices. Is that enough? And how does that sort of stack up with, European countries per se?
Well, we know that competitive markets are the ones that we want. Consumers will wind up paying lower prices, getting better quality services, and seeing more innovation. And the FCC's own data show that about half the households in our country don't have choice of broadband providers. I don't think that's good enough. We have work to do. At the same time, I think we have to be honest, which is that we have challenging geographies in this country and sparse populations that do make this more difficult. We also have to be honest about how the cost of financing, deploying, and operating networks is still quite high. There are economic reasons that deploying new networks is a challenge, but there are also technologies out there that could change things. I mean, the capacity possibility in the next generation of fixed wireless with 5G will challenge some of those providers we know today, and I think that it will take some time, but there's more competition down the road. At the same time, I think the FCC has to make sure that it takes steps to encourage that kind of competition, because consumers and our country's infrastructure will benefit.
Yeah, it's. I think there was a problem back in a couple of years ago. With the hope was that fiber was going to roll out, and that fiber would solve a lot of these issues. But fiber rollouts have pretty much stopped at this point.
Well, here's a good example. We got to find ways to make sure the cost of that rollout, everything we can do to reduce it. How can we talk to municipalities about reducing the cost of right-of-way? How can we make sure every time someone rips up a road, they throw some fiber down alongside it, so they don't have to go through those same construction costs yet another time? I think we're going to have to look at policies like that across the board to see if we can update our digital infrastructure around the country.
So I want to talk to you, I want to ask you some of the questions I ask everybody that comes on the show. The first one is a negative one. Is there a technology trend that concerns you and that keeps you up at night?
A few, yeah.
That you'd like to share with an audience of millions?
Well, I have worries about cybersecurity. You connect all these things. We have got to make sure we're up for the challenge of doing that in a secure fashion. Our national security and our economy will depend on it. So that's absolutely number one.
It's often, it's told to me by a couple of security experts that, the thing about cybersecurity is the more networked your society, the more connected it is, the more vulnerable it is.
I think that's true. So but we know that that's coming. We're not going to stop that tide. So we have to be smart about that connectivity and think about cybersecurity in everything we do. I have other concerns too. So you're giving me the opportunity, I'll lay them out. The FCC right now seeks comment on so much of what it does. And in many respects, we oversee about 1/6 of the economy. It's this dynamic sector. And we need to make efforts to make sure that more people can participate in our proceedings and comment on the things we're doing. I'm a little worried from our net neutrality proceeding that our comment channel is getting flooded with some bogus stuff and bots. I mean, we've found in the net neutrality proceeding more than 2 million people's stolen identities were filed and comments about net neutrality. We found about 500,000 comments from Russian email addresses. When you add this all up, I am also very worried that the channel for public comment on our proceedings is flooded with some junk and broken. And I think given the importance of what the agency does, we've got to clean that up.
It's actually analogous to all of our channels are being flooded by spam, by advertisements, and
I think
as we're finding out, political
we have to acknowledge
advertising.
that that's happening, and we've got to do something to clean it up, because this is one of the important ways that people talk to Washington. And I don't think it's acceptable if we just have high-priced lawyers and lobbyists doing that, and then everyone else is stuck in this flood of bogus comments. So we're gonna have to fix that, and I will continue to pressure my colleagues to do so.
Do you think there's a role for government in policing or cleaning up our social networks and the comments that are flowing there? I mean, those are private networks, private firms, but there's very much a public conversation happening there. And it's a conversation that, as we're finding out, is being increasingly manipulated by private interests and foreign interests. It's
definitely not an FCC role.
Yeah.
But I do think as citizens we should care about the quality of discourse. And I think that's an important national dialogue, and we need to have it.
In terms of, on a more positive note, is there a gadget or a service that you use every day that still inspires wonder?
Well, I definitely have wonder about phones. I mean, we have more computing power in our phones than NASA did in 1969 when they went to the moon. But
it seems like they did more with it.
They
took better advantage. All I did was post to Instagram today.
Yeah, I know that doesn't feel like a big thing, but on a more mundane level, I can't live without a fitness tracker right now. I am a devotee to 10,000 steps a day. I'm gonna have no difficulties here in this event, but I found that small change is a way to be healthy. And improve my exercise on a day-to-day basis, even if it involves just walking around my office and taking some walks while I do some phone calls and the like.
Is there a particular brand that you prefer?
I'm going to make an effort not to say.
Okay.
But I do think that's just sort of an example of some small thing that has changed my life, and for the better, and it's a demonstration of how connectivity can really make a difference.
Excellent. And then how can people follow what you're doing
absolutely.
Get in touch with you?
Sure. You know, it's amazing the phones at the FCC work. So my number is actually out there. People can write it. You can also follow me on Twitter at Rosenworcel, and I've got an email address, jessica.rosenworcel@fcc.gov, which I truly read.
How about that?
How about that? How about that?
No spam there. Thanks so much for coming on and talk to me.
Thanks for having me.
I appreciate it. That's Fast Forward for today. You can follow more MWC coverage on PCMag.com. Obviously, you can find back episodes of Fast Forward as well. Thanks so much for joining us. I'll see you in the future.